First of all, I want to, there you go. Want to invite and welcome you all, those who are here and those who are joining us live stream. It's just always wonderful. And, you know, Pat, Lee too, you know, it's nice that sometimes you join us this way and sometimes, you know, that way, depending where you are in the world. And so that's nice. As we said, we've got, depending on the week, 30 to 50 people who watch this recording each week. And so if people are following it, it's just going to make us stronger as a church. You know, the more we know scripture, obviously, the better things are. A couple just brief announcements before we dive into Hosea. We have Panera coffee back there. So let's drink it to the last drop because really it's not inexpensive. And the only reason we have Panera coffee is because Gina is not here, right? So the whole church has fallen apart. You know, we don't know what we're doing. We're complete confusion. She's up in Boston with Fran getting some tests.
If she's still there, I can make coffee, so
no.
I'll make it. Thanks.
We didn't have any. Well, Alex is also, I think his son
Brian
is going into the military, is that correct?
Oh.
Today is the big day, and so they're together. He's kind of saying goodbye to his son.
Going to the military,
I think so. I think he's going to the military. I hesitated because I'm almost sure I got that story right, but I'm not completely sure. And Brian, you know, spends a lot of time around here on Sunday helping out, especially when Alex isn't here. So that's great. Secondly, trip to Rwanda. We've got our first guinea pig. No, we got our first volunteer. Lee has already signed up to go. We're excited. The reason we said 3 to 6 is I think we can reserve safely 3 good rooms at the Jesuit Center. So if it's a single person or a couple, that makes a difference whether we take 3 or we take 6. But it's about the rooms there. And we like the Jesuit Center. This will be in January. We'll probably go right around the 9th, 10th, 11th. It'll be in that second week of January. We'll go for 10 days. It's going to be partly meeting our students, partly watching the exams. So how do we do that? Getting to know the church in Rwanda, which is just fascinating, because everything there is post-genocide. That is the big deal, right? And you'll hear some of those stories, which are both inspiring and depressing. It's the whole thing. In any case, if anybody, I know this is short notice, but there you go. That's what we've got, and we'd love to take a small group with us. And part of why I say guinea pigs is we want to learn how to do this well, where we're mixing. You know, we'll be asking the whole time: is this a good mix between work and play, right? Because we do want to see the animals, we want to have a good time. Part of it is we want to appreciate Rwanda. You know, it's like when you bring family down here for Naples, you want them to too, right? And the beach.
It seems to be the only stable part of Africa right now.
Rwanda, I think that's a great comment because they are doing well financially. And that's why businesses are gone to this little dense country. So even just from the economic standpoint, this is they're producing cars now. They're because people see them as stable, and that draws. And now they speak English instead of French. When I lived there, it was French. Now it's English, and that now makes it easier for businesses to establish themselves there. If you know your high brass or have all learned English in college.
It'll be 70s and 50s January. Be nice. The weather in Rwanda. I was just looking up to see what their weather's like.
It's I think in the front end or the back end of their second rainy season, which is good. You don't want too much dust. And
I'll be there when it's 110 degrees.
Third announcement. I've been real happy with the artwork that's been. Norma brought in one today, a picture of. Can I pass it around? Sorry. Okay. Of Jesus as both the shepherd and the Lamb of God. Interestingly, both roles in hers. And so I've asked Olga if she will do a second Olga Part 2.
I thought that was extraordinary.
Always
I
like the
watched it
pictures of it.
on the tape.
Wasn't it good?
I remember
I
this
thought
when
it
I was
was
a kid.
extraordinary.
And it was all done right off the top of her head. There was no rehearsal or
I
anything.
was beyond shocked. I mean, I look at that painting, a tree.
Well, you know, one of my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah.
stories now is Melissa, because it caught me off guard, you know, she sent it in first, because she often watches, the things when they come out on Tuesday. And, so I came in here last Thursday, and I said, Melissa, you know, when did you buy the painting? And she said, I didn't buy it, I painted it, you know. Whoa, but only, it was kind of funny, because only when I had time pre-retirement, I thought that was she says now in retirement, I just don't have time.
Well, Melissa,
Yes,
you remember our conversation
yes,
on
yes, on
Sunday?
Sunday.
Please go see Olga.
Well,
Okay.
probably will if she has that program. yeah.
Yes, so she's agreed to do it, but that's a bit fraught when you start discussing people's artwork, you know, so.
That's it.
I wanna show people's artwork who won't mind. Cause it's just difficult to do. This is something special to you, it's something personal, but I've got about 12 or 13 pieces now from the church. And we'll show them, all on the video, but then she'll comment just on a few of them. Because you can't comment on 13 pieces, that's too
Yeah.
many. But that's been very, very enjoyable. Pat, did you?
I have my little red haired girl.
Okay, good. I'd like to, and I asked, as you know, and this is the second part of the Melissa story. So she had a beautiful description spiritually of what was going on in the painting. I just thought it was wonderfully done. So I said, well, when did the painting start talking to you like that? And she said, well, after Olga's talk.
Karen.
So I shared that with her, of course, you know,
Oh, that was good.
she loved it. So we've got these others and Pat said, I gotta do more than a couple lines for the artwork to make sense and why that's so precious to her. So I gave Pat special dispensation, more than 2 or 3 lines.
Yeah.
The only other person that went beyond 2 or 3 lines is in this room.
Oh, Robert, hello.
You know,
How did we know?
Took me about 2 hours to read his.
that was the condensed version. You should see what the real version was. So God was everywhere in the painting.
Like those study books of Shakespeare and stuff, yeah.
So I can say, this has really been a happy project, you know, it's great to hear, several people here have submitted
So, but Rick,
artwork.
you didn't want to do one thing. You said it was long, but was it worthwhile reading?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm transformed.
You got a chance to see the painting this morning in real life.
Yeah, I got, yeah.
Yes.
So that was good.
The one with the blue blouse on the
That's back.
And what struck me with Olga too, was that some of our pieces from the church are quite obviously religious, either symbolic or, you know, biblical in nature. But many of them were landscapes or people. So more, an analogy or that's the way I see yours of the 3 women. I think Pat's is more historical, right? It's got symbolic historical meaning. I haven't seen it yet, so, but she described it to me. Now my daughter just went overboard too, and she sent me 5 pieces. Because that's my daughter. She takes after her mother on that one. So it's been really pleasant, and so we'll go, and that'll be the next one. So we'll say Olga Part 2, and then she'll comment on ours. And I think Robert said it, she's very spontaneous, so we'll just see what she comes up with. So that was good.
Yeah, she doesn't have to think this through or, you know, give me a day to analyze this.
Yeah, she
She
feels
just
it. She
immerses
just-
herself
yeah.
into the subject matter and the painter.
Are
I
we
think she-
going as a class to visit or?
We could have, I hadn't thought about that, Lee, but she, you know, she would love it. I'd have to give her, with Bliese is her daughter, and so often she's out at one of the galleries, let's say at Mercado, her daughter's in downtown at the Fifth Street Gallery. But they've got a lot of stuff on in their warehoused. So if I said, well, if we can have 5 religious paintings and some landscapes, and we want to take it just, that wouldn't be a video, we could just do it
Mhm.
for fun.
Yeah.
That might be really, she'd enjoy it. I think she, anybody, if you're a gallery owner, you
Come on,
come one, come all. I had to realize this, that post-COVID, more and more people, they go to the gallery, but then they want private showings. So they'll say, I'd like to see these 5 pieces in my home.
Yeah, well, sure.
Yeah, to see if it fits, to see how they work out. And maybe that's obvious, but I've been out of the business for a while. The last announcement is an important one. This is a discussion, and I was kind of hoping Jim Cooper would be here, because this is.
He said he would be here in a couple minutes, he said. I saw him outside.
Did you? Okay, so I got to tread water here a little bit. What Jim wants to start, and some of us have felt this for a long time, some people in this room have felt this way for a long time, that we needed a more organized prayer life as a congregation. But everybody feels like they don't have time, or how do you organize this, and how do you do it right? And we've got a lot of prayer warriors privately here in the congregation who connect with each other regularly and who share prayer concerns. And that's good. But the feeling was, for example, there's just so much happening here at church just right now. I could list off, these are big projects, not little ones. And they mean a lot to us. And the feeling is we're not spending enough time collectively lifting up these issues in prayer. So the idea that we want discussed first would be to start a 30-minute prayer meeting every Thursday after this session. So I'd probably end this session a few minutes early, just so we can say goodbye, hang out, talk, get another cup of Panera, please get Panera coffee. I don't want to have to take that home, although I will.
Maybe up for a week, yeah.
Buzzed out tonight.
Make iced coffee with it.
Can make a lot of things.
So my grandfather used to bring it home.
So the idea,
I was wondering when someone.
I think Jim wants to lead it, but maybe with some other help. I know like Edie's been pushing for this for a long time and does some of this privately. But we would just, for anyone, anyone who wants to, we just then move probably to the chapel, I would assume, for 30 minutes. And Jim wants to do part prayer, petition, part share, part praise too. And we'll lift up probably all sorts of matters, but I think part of it is to lift up some of these projects of the church. But not just, some other big projects as well. So what we're looking for is kind of feedback. Is that a good idea? Or if you think it is a good idea, what would be most helpful? What do you think we've done in the past? Because we've done these groups in the past. We want to do something that's sustainable, that, this is not just a couple weeks and out or a couple months and out, but something that becomes a regular portion, a regular part of our community life. And we thought Thursday might be the best time, just because it's easier for some people to stay, maybe an extra half an hour. So that's the idea. Any initial thought?
I've never participated in anything like that, so I'm having a hard time visualizing or kind of understanding the pieces, what happens.
I participated in this in my church in Minnesota for many, many years. And it's very meaningful to be a part of it, and it's meaningful for the people who we put in their requests. But the way we set it up was that the pastors gave us the requests, and from the church. And then if other people could call in as well to us if they wanted us to pray about it.
So once people know there's a group, then you can say, okay,
Yes.
there are certain things we would pray Sunday morning in church, but there are other things that we might take up here in this type of group.
It was just called the intercessory prayer group. And it would start out with prayer and praise and sometimes a short devotions, just very short. And then it was spontaneous and we prayed for the church and for people, many times for the country and others. And some, something that was troubling people out in the world and whatever. I mean, just, there weren't any, guidelines. It's prayer is talking to God and just that, tell him how we feel, and ask and have requests. And it has, there definitely has to be a leader. One who is,
Right.
just-
I think Jim, like I said, he's not here, but that's the problem. If you don't show up, then we're signing you up to lead.
That's it.
Jim.
Didn't know maybe-
That'll teach you. how to show up.
Not to be presumptive, but would it be worthwhile sharing some of your thoughts about building friendship, Christian friendships?
It's sort of what happens when you're in a, let's say even here, the Bible study, after you come week after week, these become your friends, right? It's what happens. It can happen on committees, it can happen in all sorts of groups. Prayer groups tend to create stronger bonds.
very, very strong.
It's
Yeah,
more
so that's
intimate.
your-
It's more
Very,
intimate.
very strong. Friends, lifelong friends.
Yeah, there's one thing when we talk about Bible together, that's really good, because we share our own experiences and you get closer to those who come to the group, and that's just what happens, right? So you don't want to miss Thursday, not necessarily for the content, hopefully the content too. But also you're just seeing the people that you get close to, right? And these are the ones you like to share with. Bible, prayer groups, it is a little bit more intimate because you're sharing more intimate things. It's not just the big ticket items, that we've been following in Morocco or Libya, Ukraine and Russia, but also, but in the nation, but also, our call committees, our stewardship, big projects we have here in the fall, reach out to families and kids, things, that we want to keep focused on collectively, not just individually. A lot of people are very faithful in their private prayers. That we don't want to stop. We just want to have collective opportunities.
Rick, you know what I think is important? We as a conglomerate or a congregation need to listen in a collective way too, as to what God is saying to us.
Mhm.
It's one thing for us to speak to him, but if we all sit with that same intentional prayer and then spend quiet time listeing to what God is saying back to us.
Be still and know.
No,
I'm God.
I have to say, Pat, and I think you'll agree. One group where that really happens now is Monday's Worship Matters. I feel that that's a very prayerful group, as we discussed the sermon. It can go personal and deep pretty fast, right?
Right.
So now the sermon is just an excuse, so to speak,
Oh, yeah.
for God doing another
That's
conversation.
right.
And then the group gets pretty good at doing this together, and it gets pretty close too. I think for the same reason, but I feel there's a listening dimension to that group, and it's not just listening to the sermon, it's listening to each other, which I always come out having learned something, about what happened Sunday, what happened and what didn't happen. If that makes sense. Yeah. But I hear what you're saying, more you want to build that into any way that you design it. So when Jim comes, pour him a cup of coffee.
And tell them the good news.
Welcome him to the group and thank him for leading, for him signing up to lead this group. That's really good. Let's start with Hosea. We're going to start in the weeds.
All right.
I'm just trying to make Melissa happy.
Start with the good description.
We're gonna read the first 3 chapters. Why? As you'll see in the video today, here's where he describes his wife Gomer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we just want to take a moment now of
Here's
Here's the good
We're
news.
here.
Yay! Wait a here.
Nobody ever does this to me.
Today's special.
Get a cup of coffee.
Yes, get a cup of coffee. All right.
It'll all be made.
Oh, that's it. It's
It'll all be revealed. in-
You're on
in
the
due time.
carpet.
So, Melissa, I want you to start, and we're gonna ask you to do one, but if somebody else could think about two. Now, again, we're now moving into the minor prophets. You have the major prophets, the minor prophets. Major prophets, if you don't, sometimes I don't like to make those distinctions, because it's like saying, oh, those are the red letter Bible, the red letter Bibles, and so then people only pay attention to the red letters, Jesus'
Yeah.
words. And that's just not how we understand scripture. All scripture is inspired by God.
We get a lot of.
So you don't want to say, I would say the major prophets are harder, because it's a longer book, they're more dense, and we don't tend to read them completely. Minor prophets are the same way. We're going into territory where, let's just be honest, we don't read these very often. We take snippets in church. So we know, we don't know Jeremiah, but we know Jeremiah chapter 31. Because we always read Jeremiah. Isaiah, we don't know all of Isaiah, but there's about 5 chapters we read regularly. 40, 53, 55, 61, that pop up in our regular reading cycle, but we're not reading all of Isaiah, so we're just plucking those things out. Hosea would be the same way, and all the minor prophets. So usually you speak of 5 major prophets, 12 minor prophets. And here, one of the unique aspects of Hosea, we're going to pick up in these first 3 chapters, because he is going to prophesy using his marriage as a teaching tool. There might be a better way of saying that. And the marriage isn't going well. So now, all of a sudden, maybe a private little problem is now going to become something we read about for the next 2,000 years. So beware, I guess, So we want to hear about not only his wife, but his family, his children, how he names his children, and how that all becomes grist for the mill, so to speak. So Melissa, if you could look at one, but notice, just look at your Bibles now. Chapter 1 is prose, right? But what do you see in chapter 2? Poetry, right? And then we're going to go to 3, and then we'll stop. 3 is again
Prose.
chapter 4.
Poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, imagine, I can't, so, but imagine a preacher who's speaking more in poetry than prose. That's pretty remarkable. Just rhetorically, when was the last time you heard a good poem recited? A lengthy poem recited? Now it just hit me last night. My daughter sent me one. It was a conversation interview between Stephen Colbert and this actress, British actress, about her series. I guess she plays a young British woman who falls in love with a Catholic priest. Maybe you know what the name is. I can't remember the name. Fox.
I knew Thornbirds.
Yeah.
And so there's something, a fox in the title, and so he asked her, who is the fox in the title? And she is stunned by it. She's stunned by it. And she goes, like a true art person, well, what do you think the fox represents? Yeah, you always turn that around. You never want to complete. And then he recites a good portion of this very famous poem, The Hound of Heaven. Do you know this poem? The Hound of Heaven.
The Hound of Heaven.
One of the most famous poems in English literature, about how this guy who's struggling, it's a Christian poem. I want to say like in the 1860s, but that's probably not right, but 19th century and last half. And it's talking about how God is the hound of heaven going after him, won't let him go. He's going to hunt him down. And all his reflections on not wanting to be hunted down, trying to get away from God, fleeing from God. And Colbert starts reciting this by heart. That's the first time in a while that I just heard someone off the cuff all of a sudden recite, it's 183 lines, the poem. So this is not, this is for it's not for the weak of heart, this is for an actor, So he quotes the first section of the poem. She is aghast because he says, well, you know the poem. She says, well, absolutely, of course, she's a cultured British actress. She says, I just can't believe you're sitting there reciting.
An American.
Yeah, but no, that was
didn't say,
exactly,
but
that was the
there.
implied. American,
Yeah, right.
do you guys read poetry even, let alone memorize it? You just can feel the critique.
Yeah.
And then he goes and quotes the end of the poem. Now, I've told you this before, one of my favorite services that Pastor Steve did was
The
Christmas Eve,
service, yes.
where he would recite by heart the
Yes.
first 20
James,
verses of
yes,
Luke.
it was powerful.
There's just something about someone standing up front, quoting poetry, or quoting the story that we all so know so well. And so here we've got Hosea. Think about that just for a second. The prophet is coming with poetry, pretty devastating poetry, right? Not pleasant. But what does it say about the people hearing him? Right? What does this say about how the word of God struck their ears in exile? Or no, excuse me, not in exile, in the Northern Kingdom. Would it be like a rap singer today? Because rap is used quite heavily, maybe not in this circle, but rap is poetry, right? And there's a certain rhythm, there's a certain rhetorical rhythm to it that people like, right, all around the world. But it's poetry. Music is poetry, obviously, and we don't usually think of prophecy in that sense of to sing it. But I think all of us probably have one folk song or something from our past where the song really struck us, but it was poetry. So I'm just trying to get the feeling of Hosea showing up and reciting at length poetry to bring this message of judgment on the Northern Kingdom. Remember, this is all about the North. This is him saying that basically the Assyrians are going to come down and nothing's going to be left. I mean, this is devastating stuff. And that's exactly what happened in 722. The North, when we're talking about the Northern Kingdom, we often refer to it here as the Northern Kingdom. You could also call it Jacob or Ephraim. Those are all phrases used in the Old Testament that have different backgrounds. And then the South, two tribes, and that is Judah, Benjamin, or they just talk about Jerusalem. It just boils down to the capital city. So, Melissa, will you start off? We're going to get through the three before we view the, just to get a sense of how he's going to use his family relationship and his marriage as the key metaphor for the poetry, the prophecy that he gives to the Northern Kingdom.
The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son.
Okay, what have you heard just so far?
The Lord said to him, it's repeated quite a lot.
The Lord speaks to him, go find an adulterous woman. Whew. Now those, if you ever had a prayer, please come in and get that verified. If you ever hear God speak to you in this way.
I want a second opinion.
Get a second opinion on listening to God. I think God's calling me to marry a prostitute.
Oh, right.
Let's pray on that one together.
Send Aaron.
I can just see fundamentalists going nuts over this.
This is the whole family values, follow the biblical picture of family.
I think I'm going to use this one against my fundamentalist friends.
Then the Lord said to Hosea, call him Jezreel, because I will punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not love. For I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them.
Okay, before we read on, can you imagine calling your
Not
child?
love.
Not love.
Not love.
Whoa.
Another
Just hold on to that. I remember, we all have probably grown up with certain friends who had funny names,
Mhm.
you know? The parents are just,
Not thinking.
Mood does.
Apple
yes.
some of them
Blue.
Apple of the eye.
I'm a
Some-
Irma and I'm a hog. Real story.
Classics. My friend, the one where I started noticing, his name was Drew Allen Blank.
Drew
Allen Blank.
So Drew A. Blank.
Oh,
That is
How-
that.
Now, his parents thought that was hilarious. Just hilarious.
Oh, the kid didn't.
But the kids wearing this, and that's the whole idea. We all know the seriousness of a name. We've all carried our own
Yeah,
names.
kids know what
Some of us rebel against our names, right? Because
It is what it is.
the name is not up to our standards, let's put it that way. Others, we carry it with great pride because it's got family legacy, it's got meaning, it's got stories behind it. So just stop and think about the power of these names here. It's just really something. Keep on.
Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them. After she weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the Israelites will be like sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together. They will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land. The great will be the day of Jezreel. Say to your brothers, my people, and of your sisters, my loved one.
Okay, so,
Oh, lovely.
okay, chapter 2.
Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her remove adulterous look from her face and the unfaithfulness from between her breast. Otherwise, I will strip her naked and make her as bare as on the day she was born. I will make her a desert, turn her into parched land, and slay her with thirst.
Okay, just stop there just for a second. He's gonna make her barren. Fruitless, right?
Mhm.
So you don't want to get lost in the metaphors here. Okay, go ahead. I'm 4.
I will not show my love to her children because they are children of adultery. Their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She said, I will go after my lovers who gave me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. Therefore, I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. She will chase after her lovers, but not catch them. She will look for them, but not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband as at first, for then I was better off than now. She has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished her on the silver and gold, which they used in Baal. Therefore, I will take away my grain when it ripens, my new wine when it is ready. I will take back my wool and my linen, intended to cover her naked body. So now I will expose her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers. No one will take her out of my hands. I will stop all her celebrations, her yearly festivals, her new moons, her Sabbath days, all her appointed festivals. I will ruin her vines and her fig trees, which she said were of her pay from her lovers. I will make them a thicket, and wild animals will devour them. I will punish her for the days she burned incense into, is it balls? Okay. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but me she forgot, declares the Lord. Therefore, I am not going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyard, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the days she came up out of Egypt. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of Baal from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. In that day, I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds in the sky, and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle, I will abolish them from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. In that day I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the skies, and they will respond to the earth. And the earth will respond to the grain and the new wine and the olive oil, and they will respond to Jezreel. I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called, not my loved one. I will say to those called, not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God.
Okay, before we go to chapter 3, if somebody would be thinking about volunteering for that, what, oh, when you hear this, a lot happens in chapter 2. It's quite a movement there. What, any responses just initially to what you just heard read?
It's like a new covenant he's going to make with them. They're going to be peaceful. They will declare him their God, and he will declare, you are my people. He will love them again.
Interesting. How does it affect you when instead of starting with, you will be my God, I'll be your people, you start with, you were not my husband, but now you're going to become my, in that personal language is quite striking to me.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of just saying, it's not just like a God-human relationship, but because he's using, you were,
Covenant or renew it.
in fact, you were out playing the field.
Yeah.
I saw you, basically, I saw you playing the field, and you're going from lover to lover, not realizing I was the one taking care of you. And I mean, it's quite graphic in its detail of unfaithfulness.
Rick, one of the things that strikes me about this is, and I remember reading it, or talking to a Jewish rabbi who was saying essentially the Old Testament is a bipolar God who's a manic depressive.
No, he
Okay?
isn't.
And you see it so well in this. The first part of this is so depressing. And when I read this passage, or when I heard you, and Leah you did such a great job reading this. I will not show my love to her children because they are the children of adultery. So what kind of a God would ever say that? That is like vindictive, revengeful.
No, I guess I see it, Robert. Now, see what you would respond to. I just see him as completely human at this point, just like any of us would respond. Like any of us with the mixed emotions. It's not bipolar. It's complex emotions when your wife or husband has been unfaithful.
Right.
And I still love him. Now I hate him too.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
I love
And do I take her back? Or do I ban her forever? I mean, so I don't see it as the bipolar as much as the
human response.
The human response to a very bad relationship. And you see God going back and forth, right? First saying, okay, that's it. I am done with you. And it's interesting in this poem, Hosea hears from God. God says, "Not, we have to love her again. We have to take it back. We'll see that in chapter 3.
But hang
So
on a
I
second.
see it as more. Can you not identify with these just human
And I
emotions
detest
of,
that
of
stuff.
what?
And I'll say why.
Okay.
Because this is, that passage that I just wrote about, the children,
Uh-huh.
is passing the sins of the father and the mother on to the children.
Yes,
And that is wrong.
but
and I
it's
know-
true.
But it
Yes,
happens.
but
Well, no, it's
doesn't-
not always true. It's not always
But-
true.
But doesn't God
Third and fourth
use the
generation.
sins of people to suffer? So he can show his mercy,
Mhm.
and
Teach
then
lessons, like Job.
we can result in the blessings that he
That's
showed.
right.
So he's showing, and he's making people suffer for their sins in order for him to come and show mercy and tell them, let them know how wrong they were, and I'm showing mercy on you, but he uses those people to suffer. They have to suffer.
Others says that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of building on both of those things, just what we've been learning too with the past prophets, like Ezekiel, which you always like to say, he was gonna sleep on his side, tied up next to cow poop. And not only that, but you kind of go, God is a God of tremendous heart, passion, and drama, because he says, I'm willing, let's let that go on for a year.
Yeah.
And so you think, and then this story, how from the heart of God, we're gonna enter into this story where God is going to try to teach us something,
Yeah.
right?
It's predetermined.
But there's this elaborate
Yeah.
unfolding, right, of this
Right.
imagery and no, of this reality of
Right.
the marriage.
Mhm.
And it just kind of speaks to like again, in our society, where you just flippantly say, well, yeah, John went away, he took everybody's stuff and then we forgave him. But you know what I mean? And then it's kind of fast. But God, this is kind of annoying to me. God takes time.
Yes.
He's like, let's get into the detail, to your point. So
Into the
maybe
weeds.
you're upset with some of the
Right.
wrenching detail.
Because I've been through it.
Okay,
I've been
okay.
through it,
But
and I know
we,
what it
to
does.
Francis's point, we know where we're going, right? In
Yeah.
this story.
It's
So,
predetermined.
but the timing.
God's
Matt,
I was just gonna say,
We
God
don't
was
know
emotionally
what's
torn. He had
suffering.
two options, to either end the covenant or renew the covenant.
Well put, Jim.
Mhm.
Well put.
It's
And-
on that.
It, just like you said, I mean, like, if your loved one cheated on you or something like that, of course you like them, don't like them, and then.
If your loved one cheats on you and you go to your friends, what advice does?
Dump them.
That's usually what they say.
Right, see?
I'd say 7 out of 10.
Exactly.
Go with the dump.
You know where
How
they're
many
at.
say stay with it? It's worth staying with.
Right, right.
I would say that's usually the minority now,
absolutely.
1 or 2, so I think we're caught into the human drama.
Yeah.
Which God is using here, but to say, I could have done too, but I'm not going to,
Mhm.
yeah. Although I have to say, it's pretty harsh to call a child.
Yeah. Nobody
Not
loves
love.
it.
Nobody loves it.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, and your other brother, he's not loved either.
That's not fair.
So that,
He
you
says he's
know,
gonna punish them and then forgive.
but if it's not, that's the power of the prophetic word of lying on your side for, a year, cooking over this.
Well,
Norman?
he often does this, from time to time, and shows us in the Bible, how he shows the realism of it. And this is the way it is, but if this changes, this is the hope, deal with it.
Mhm.
I give you hope, and this is will happen, you will have eternal life, but you have to be confronted with what is wrong in order to see and ask for the forgiveness.
I also think, and I don't know if this is fair or not, I just don't know. But we put up with a lot of pretty dramatic advertising in our culture.
Yes.
And we use explicit sex,
Mhm.
which we've kind of grown used to. But if someone else from another culture comes in and watches, they go, wow,
Mm.
boy, why do you do that, so to speak? But it's also in theater and in movies.
Mhm.
Sometimes we call it, gratuitous violence at times. Now, the directors will often explain, no, that was a way to capture, your attention. It was a way of Saving Private Ryan. I think of just the brutality of war. And if you don't show it from the soldier's perspective, you're not gonna understand, or you're gonna sanitize it, and I don't want to sanitize it as a director. So you've got all this stuff going on here, and I would say, obviously, in Hosea's time, this is part of the way rhetorically.
Let me ask you this question, Rick. In order to have faith in God, I have to trust God. Okay? Everybody agree, faith and trust go hand in hand. So how do I trust a God that does a drive-by shooting on these kids? And this is what it is. It's a drive-by shooting. Okay? These kids had nothing to do with what their parents were. And they were supposed to be children of God who were birthed no matter who the parents were. Innocent. They're totally innocent.
But so was Jesus.
And so was Job.
And somebody had to suffer.
But, they had to suffer because humanity made them suffer.
Exactly.
Not because God said, I'm going to cast a spell of evil against the children of this adulterous wife. They had nothing to do with it. How do I have trust in God and faith in God when I know that God is not fair? That's not.
You lay it alongside a lot of things. It's like my father, I can think of a time when my father went nuts on me, but I can also think of how he would come back to me and say, Jim, sorry, I screwed up.
Yeah.
And so, and that lays alongside of, I mean, that's part of growing up where you kind of, you hold it all, right? And you have to sort of, like you said, I could hang my father if I hooked him on one word or one event, but I don't. I try to look at it all, right? So, and you do that too for other people. I mean, you're literally, God calls us to be that to people, to be the forgiving person.
But sure.
Yeah.
Christianity.
And be patient with people, because some of us come around and we're like, oh my God, what a stupid, dumb thing I just did.
But I think to your point, it is intense. So that intensity, the intensity is not to be shied away from. It's to just say, now that we've spent 8 minutes in this, whatever you grueling drive-by shooting, we spent 8 minutes there, let's spend 60 minutes over here, in the grace of God, right? For some balance.
Exactly.
But it's more than balance.
I like
It's
what
more
you
than
said,
balance.
Jim. But I'm just going to put in a little different context.
Yeah.
One of the things that I look for from God is wisdom.
Oh.
A wise person never does this kind of, drive-by shooting.
Oh, wait.
It's predetermined, it's trust in God, that it's gonna be okay, no matter what.
I think an intervention
It's
is,
trust.
this is an intervention, to use our modern language, where things are so bad. The family kind of, I'll put it sharp, gangs up on one of its members. It's out of love, but it can be harsh if you've ever participated in an intervention, especially, and the person is on the brink of killing themselves, let's say with alcohol.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking about.
Intervention, right?
And the intervention was brutal, right? We're kicking you out of the family. We can't,
Can't enable
Right.
anyone.
we love you, so there's the love language, but the way we're gonna express it is we don't wanna see you again until, right? Did they feel good about it? Of course not. But life is so hard sometimes, and I think Hosea is trying to say here, you guys, we read it here, you've got multiple lovers. So at this time, it's not just going to the temple, on Sabbath, they're also going to Baal during the week, right? When you pray for your crops, it's Baal, because Baal's good with crops, or with children, but then you go to give your sacrifices to God as well. Why not, hedge your bets? You put numbers down on all the numbers, and God is saying,
We have to suffer.
that is,
It's
and
better.
one more point, then I'm gonna read chapter 3. Because I know I'm not pushing for an answer here, but I will, I'll come back to it. Some here, and you have, Robert, you've been in a war. You didn't vote for that war. You didn't create the conditions for that war. How many of your buddies died?
More
Not
than I
because,
want to recount.
exactly.
Real
That's the
people,
sins,
friends
that's
of
the
mine.
sins of the fathers upon the children of the third and fourth generation.
Right.
Is it our fault that I was in the war? No, it's
No.
not my guilt, but it's the guilt of the community. You know, we got into this thing, and all of a sudden I find myself in a war. Or I find my heart's given out because I have a weak heart or a weak lung or something in my system. I didn't deserve that. It's not like I was smoking or drinking. It was because my parents had a weak lung and they passed it on to me, and then that might do me in. So there is, I think there's a truth. Not talking, and we're certainly not talking about fairness, because if I get the weak lung because of my parents, it's not fair. It's not, no, it's not about fairness.
Life isn't.
But life is not fairness in this case, and the sins of the fathers upon the children is trying to give us language to talk about the unfairness, the fallenness of life, right? That we get caught in things that sometimes are not our fault, like these children who are now named, who are not loved. And part of it is, it's not just God declaring it, by the way I read this, it's because mom doesn't love them either. Right, these are the children of just someone who's not committed to the family, not committed to Hosea, just not committed to much at all. And so I got a feeling it's not just God saying you were unloved, it's basically naming the situation for what it is. Okay,
Think how often it happens, though, that one party in the marriage has an affair and there's a child, may not be named, not loved, but in essence, not
Yeah.
loved by many in this family or that family. So I think it happens
all the time,
all the
Sure.
time.
Yes.
especially if you're a public figure and you're worried about
Yes, it's the-
being identified with,
it's the stalking.
or even a child who's running into problems, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what's going on now with Biden and his son? You know, can you embrace the son in public? What does that mean? Will you be embarrassed by it? Well, you know, and yet I'm a father. How do I embrace the son who I love? And then you throw in another child who's died, and that adds another dimension of complexity to it. So again, I think it's naming reality.
Yeah,
This is,
happens all the time.
happens all the time.
A child is innocent, you know,
But-
has to suffer the sins of the parents and generations. Society responds to that, or a family responds to it, is reality of life.
We'll have a child response to it too.
Yeah, do, yes.
Or you're blamed for something you didn't do.
All right,
Generations.
chapter 3, and then we'll watch the film.
film.
Again, we're just, the first 3 chapters are using the relationship as a platform for the prophetic word here. Who can read 3? Sure.
I'm glad to.
The Lord said to me again, go, love a woman who was a lover and is an adulteress, just as the Lord loves the people of Israel, through and torn of the other gods and love raising cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels, and silver, and homer of barley, and a measure of wine. And I said to her, you must remain as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore. You shall not have the intercourse with a man, nor with you. For the Israelites shall remain many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward, the Israelites shall return and seek the Lord their God, and David their king. They shall come in awe to the Lord and to his goodness of their later days.
Why does Hosea have to buy her again?
Keep the covenant between God and his people. And the Messianic king is coming.
So it's interesting that the economic dimension of this is quite interesting. And we know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
With Jesus. There is a redemptive quality here to the text that gets played out in the New Testament.
30 pieces of silver that was worth.
Like Judah.
Interesting?
Yes,
Isn't that
yes,
just
yes,
interesting?
yes,
Whoa.
that right.
I've told this story, so I won't tell it in detail again, but when I read this all the time, I always think of Africa. You know, we went to buy that African parent at a friend's house who was leaving, a European, but he had gone native and that he married two African women. I've told you the story, but. And so Nina and I went to buy the parrot, and the parrot didn't like women, it attacked Nina, and so the guy came in and said, I forgot to tell you. The parrot doesn't like women. You can imagine Nina, what am I doing here? You know, Rick, we're going. So we're heading out, and he says, can I talk to you for a second? I said, sure. We're in his kitchen. Nina goes out to the truck. He points over to the corner, and there's these two gorgeous African women dressed to the hilt, you know. Those were his wives, and of course he can't take them back to Europe. You know, that's not gonna work, you know. So he asked me, you know, would you like to buy one of my wives? Have I told you this story?
No.
Gives us temptation now.
So I'm not good.
Your wife's in another room.
I'm not good at these type of situations. I just tell you, I know that about myself. Because my first reaction is, what? You know, I'm a pastor, right? And
Just say you can't afford it.
no, so
Get out of it
that's
that
what
way.
you should have said. I
Yes.
did not say
I
that.
barely afford one. Those two.
So then I'm intrigued by this whole thing. What would a wife cost these days? So unfortunately, we started to barter. I just had to know. I was not gonna go out to that truck without knowing how this whole thing works. So he's saying, well, you know, you get 2 for 1 and 2 for this one. and He's trying to do the right thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
This gives the woman dignity again. So here we got Hosea doing something to give this prostitute, his wife, dignity again. That's the way Africa works. So he didn't want to leave them because they would be adulterers then if they went and married someone else. You've got to redeem the person. So basically what he's asking me is not to buy them, but it's to redeem them, to give them worth again, to say it's okay to marry again.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's big.
So at the end of the story, I've spent way too much time.
And Nina's in the other room.
Nina's in
In
the
the
truck
truck.
way worse. Nina's in the truck
He's
way
mad at
worse.
the parrot,
Looking at her watch. So I come out, I says, what were you doing?
foddering.
No,
Now comes that moment of decision.
You tell the
Do
truth.
you tell the truth? I
You
was,
skew the story.
he offered me to buy his wives and I just wanted to know the price. Do you come clean or do you say, oh no, we were talking about the weather?
Not the weather.
So what did you do?
Unfortunately, I told the truth. I thought she think it was really funny.
Did she?
No. She did not. It's like, you did what? Were you seriously just, I said, well, no, yeah, of course, you know, I wasn't serious, but I was really interested. So curiosity killed the cat. What is that? What is it?
So how much?
So how much is it?
What was the offer?
one talent, too much. One talent.
I'll tell you tomorrow.
Okay.
So,
That's not fair. Okay, it's no,
You wanted to
she
get
was,
in the weeds.
both of them were expensive. He was gonna ask for more than 3 cows for each. That's
That's big.
big.
Yeah.
So, the bartering, again,
Yeah,
traditionally for the woman, could be
Utter
in
destruction.
money or
Yeah.
some materials, but
Yeah.
it's usually like 3, this was a lot, 3 cows for each plus other things, plus, some.
It'll be
You know
fun to
what
see how
happened?
many
I have a
people
wife and
sign
2
up to
horses.
go to
I have 2
Rwanda
horses.
now.
I mean,
I have a little big one.
Did they
You may
get-
come back with some extra baggage. All right,
That's a story of transaction. That's a transactional culture.
yeah, but yes, I just think we have a piece of that too, when you get married, there's, what do you bring to the relationship, what
dowry.
assets, a dowry,
Dowry.
that was all part of,
It's the deal.
it's
Let's make a
saying, will my daughter have enough to make it, so there's some of that stuff that I think translates across culture, and you can even say love, yes, love, but also assets. So, all right, so we got a feeling then for how Hosea rolls at the beginning. So let's roll the tape and see what the Bible Project has to say.
If I was in construction, this I'd do it as a Socratic dialogue, where God is debating with another entity, not God saying this whole thing in chapter 2.
The book of the prophet Hosea. Hosea lived in the northern kingdom of Israel, which he sometimes calls Ephraim or Jacob, about 200 years after they had broken off from southern Judah. Remember the story from 1 Kings. Hosea was called to speak on God's behalf during the reign of one of Israel's worst kings, Jeroboam II. The nation was descending into chaos, and in the year 722, the big bad Assyrian Empire swooped in and decimated Israel. Again, see the story in 2 Kings. And Hosea had seen all of this coming. The book is a collection of some 25 years of his preaching and writing. It's almost all poetry. And this whole collection has been designed to have 3 main sections. Let's just dive in and you'll see how it works. The opening part tells the story of Hosea's broken marriage to a woman named Gomer, who commits adultery. Now, it's not totally clear whether Gomer slept around with other men before or only after they got married, but they did have 3 children together and things fell apart. The important point is that God tells Hosea that despite Gomer's unfaithfulness, he is to go find her, to pay off her debts to her lovers, and to commit his love and faithfulness to her once again. And then God says that all of this, the broken and repaired marriage, the children, it's all a prophetic symbol, telling the story of God's relationship to Israel. So God has been like a faithful husband to Israel. He rescued them out of slavery. He brought them to Mount Sinai, where he entered into a covenant with them. He asked them to be faithful to him alone. But then he brought Israel into the promised land, and they took all the abundance that he gave them, and they dedicated it to the worship of the Canaanite god Baal. And so God has a legitimate reason. He could end the covenant and divorce Israel, and he thinks about doing so, but instead, he says that he's going to pursue Israel again and renew his covenant with them. And he says why? It's purely because of his own love, compassion, and faithfulness. Hosea then spells out what all this means. He says the consequences for Israel's rebellion will be imminent defeat by other nations and exile. But there's hope for future restoration. One day Israel will once again repent and come back to worship their God. And Hosea says he will place over them a new messianic king from the line of David who will bring God's blessing. And so this opening section introduces all the main ideas of the book. Israel has rebelled, and God's going to bring severe consequences, but God's own covenant love and mercy are more powerful than Israel's sin. And so in the remaining sections of the book, Hosea's poetry explores these themes in more depth. So there are 2 collections of his accusations and warnings for Israel, and then each of these is concluded by a very hopeful poem about God's mercy and hope for the future. So chapters 4 through 10, Hosea explores the causes and effects of Israel's unfaithfulness. He says numerous times that Israel lacks all knowledge or understanding of God. The Hebrew word to know, which is yada, it's more than just intellectual activity. It describes personal relational knowledge. It's the difference between just knowing about someone and then actually knowing that someone. And God wants Israel to know him like that, in a relationship. He wants them to experience his love for them and become the kind of knowledge that transforms their hearts and lives so that they love him in return. And so this is why Hosea is constantly exposing the hypocrisy of Israel's worship. He constantly shows how they're breaking the 10 Commandments, how they're allowing grave injustice in their communities, and then they go to their sacred temples and they offer sacrifices to God like everything is just fine. But it's not fine. And not only because of their hypocrisy, but because they're worshiping all of these other gods too. He mentions many times their altars to Baal at the cities of Bethel and Gilgal. And not only have they given their allegiance to other gods, Hosea repeatedly accuses Israel for trusting in their political alliances with Egypt and Assyria. So instead of trusting God to protect them, they want to become like these nations and rely solely on military power. And God says it's all going to come crashing down on their heads, because in not too long, Assyria will turn on them and come to ravage their lands. In this other section of warning, Hosea gives an ancient Israelite history lesson to show how this family's been unfaithful from the beginning. So he alludes to the patriarch Jacob's lying and treachery. Remember Genesis 27 and 28. He alludes to Israel's rebellion in the wilderness. Remember the book of Numbers. He alludes to their appointment of the corrupt king Saul, who led the people into sin and disaster. Remember the stories in 1 Samuel. This is all Hosea's way of saying some things in this family never change. So what hope does Hosea have? Well, we know from chapter 3 that God's going to do something to save and restore his people. And that's what these two concluding chapters explore. Chapter 11 is beautiful. The poem depicts God as a loving father who raised his son Israel and then shared everything with him. But the son grew up and rebelled and turned on the father, taking advantage of his generosity. And so in this poem, God is emotionally torn apart. One moment he's angry, and naturally he says he's going to bring severe consequences. But the next moment he's heartbroken. And then he says that he's moved by his mercy and compassion, and he's going to forgive the son that he loves. He says, "How can I give you up, Ephraim? My heart churns inside of me. All my compassion is aroused." And so while God did allow Israel to be conquered by Assyria, face the consequences, that's not God's final word. There's still hope. And that's what the last chapter is about. Hosea calls Israel to repent and turn back to their God, but he knows that it won't last because it never has before. And God says that one day he will heal their waywardness and love them freely. God goes on to describe this new healed Israel as a lush tree that will grow deep roots and broad branches and offer shade and fruit to all of the nations. It's an image of God's promise to Abraham, how Israel was to become a blessing to the nations. And God's saying if that's ever going to happen, it's going to require an act of God's grace and healing power to repair the deep brokenness and sinful selfishness of the human heart, so that God's people can receive his love and love him in return. This is what God promises to do. Now, after this poem concludes, we find the very last words of the book. They're like an appended note. They're likely from the author who collected Hosea's poetry and now wants to speak to you, the reader, for a second. And he says, who is wise and discerning to understand all of this? In other words, Hosea's poems. The ways of the Lord are right. The righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble in them. So the author wants you to know that Hosea's ancient poetry to northern Israel is not locked in the past. It reveals deep truths about God's character and purposes and human nature. And while God should and does bring his justice on human evil, his ultimate purpose, his heart, is to heal and to save his people. And that's what the book of Hosea is all about.
We've seen this lesson, this Old Testament.
How many times?
How many times is the lesson said, just in different?
Yeah.
So
It's like
immediate
forgiveness.
reactions, already hearing you saying, some of this is rinse and repeat, huh?
Exactly.
But to that point, I think we need to ask ourselves, well, what's the lesson in that?
Yeah, why don't we keep making?
No, what's the lesson in the fact that this is always being spoken to us? So this is what, we've heard this now for 20 weeks or whatever we've been doing. So I'm trying to think about that, like, well, what is the lesson in that it keeps needing to be spoken to me?
Excellent question. Let me come back though with the statement that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And so in some ways, and I'm not being critical of what you're saying, but there's also almost an insanity in this. Because if you look at it today, what's going on in Israel today? It's the same stuff.
Yep.
What are we missing? So what I
But
would
if you
add to that
visit,
question.
if you visit your grandma, let's just say you visited your grandma when you were 5 and now you're 55 and your grandma said the same thing to you when you were 5. She said,
Yes.
come in here, baby. I love you.
Good analogy,
And-
good analogy. So the question I'm gonna come back with, I'm gonna answer your question with another question. What's missing? What's missing in a learning loop of humanity that enables us to keep making this mistake over the course of three
Because it
thousand
doesn't have
years?
anything to do with
Because
learning.
we have free choice.
Well, so that's the question I'm gonna throw out. What's missing? in all
What do
this?
you,
I
We
got
have
some
free
thoughts.
choice to do what's right. or
okay,
what's
so we
wrong.
got free choice,
We
okay,
got free
and we always
choice.
choose to do the wrong thing.
I don't think it
Human
has anything to
condition.
do with learning, because that would be pretty simple.
We do what we do.
I think it has to do with the nature of sin
That's
and the
it, sin
nature
nature.
of
Yeah.
temptation and
Mhm.
falling into it.
And we're-
So there's no hope then? 'Cause
Well,
we're gonna-
I'm gonna
That's where
piggyback,
faith
I'll
comes in.
piggyback on Pat to
Faith
say,
in God.
really, if God is love, God is love. So right on the cusp of love, if I open the door for you,
Okay.
say, let me show you what love is, right, really close to it is the freedom to drift,
Mhm.
right? So I think God has opened the tap rather than being the governor. He opened the tap of love to us.
Yeah.
And there's a inherent danger in that.
I think that's a fascinating
choice.
response,
Free
but I
choice.
think there's more to it, and it goes also to what Pat is saying. Where's the learning? Where's then the learning that's used to innovate? See, you know, if we look at learning to innovate, and we look at technology on the one hand, and humanity on the other, humanity's been stuck in this
Yeah.
cycle as technology has taken off.
Mhm.
And so what did we learn in the humanity that allows us to do the resurrection, to see that the love can actually contains a hidden code that tells us how to make the resurrection of humanity occur. And that's why I think this New Testament is so important, because it gives us more guidelines. But then I think we're still stuck a little bit because we see humanity having real struggles right now, and the Christian church is contracting. So what can we learn out of the Christian church that says, here's where the resurrection of a new Christianity can occur, that will help resurrect the world and get us out of this mess that we're in.
We have
And
to
I think
build
that's
on
our
that good.
challenge.
Yeah, we have to build on that good.
That's the
Everything
grand strategy.
We have to build
So,
on that good. I believe. We have to
So I
build
think,
what's out there that's
Robert,
good.
you framed something that's important in looking at the prophets. First of all, what was the word for knowledge? Do you remember that?
Yada.
Yada,
And what does it
Moses in
mean?
Greek.
Yada, yada, yada.
yada,
Yada
yeah.
meant-
but it was more than just knowledge.
Yada means more than knowledge.
We
Yes.
build on
So
that.
what was he trying to say about this type of knowledge?
Intellectual and
It's
relational.
like an intimate
It's a
relationship.
Personal, that
with somebody.
personal,
Yes.
loving relationship with God, with your creator.
Where-
with
Where's the
someone.
first time we run into that word in the New Testament? We used to joke about it in Sunday school,
Mhm.
right? That Adam knew Eve,
Knew his wife.
he knew his wife, and he knew his wife, you know? It's that intimate knowledge. That's the
Oh,
same
yeah,
word
knowing
that's
someone
used
else, right, there.
that in a relationship, right? And so it's interesting that it's used here within the framework of Gomer and this adulterous relationship. I want you to really know me, right? Secondly, I think the critique of Leviticus and the whole sacrificial system is the one you're bringing up, which is it's always rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, and then don't we get tired of this now? There's no change. God, what are you going to do to actually change this vicious cycle that we're in? And that is the whole lead in to the cross. It's the whole lead in that God is not going to now keep asking us to do the sacrificial system, which was gracious, but didn't change anything. Doesn't change it.
A
So-
basic precept is we only change behavior when the rewards are more painful. I mean, when the outcome is more painful than the reward. We change behavior when the outcomes are more painful than the rewards.
To put it another way, by the way, and I've done the study on this with numerous senior executives. I asked them a question which reflects this. I said, how much change in business in your lifetime has come from crisis and how much has come from vision?
Right.
The normal answer is 85% crisis, 15% vision.
But crisis is opportunity for growth, what the Japanese
It
argue
is.
about.
It is.
Yes.
It is. You know, that's the danger and opportunity in the Chinese symbol of change. But you know, what happens is a crisis ends up creating reactions, whereas vision is much more proactive. And I think that's where the church needs to be going, is being much more proactive, because there is a crisis on our doorstep right now. Our kids are committing suicide. Okay, and I know how painful that must be to you, because you were the youth minister. We look at society imploding and becoming more polarized and paralyzed by the polarization. And how do we create unity in the diversity? And these are concepts that are so strong in Christianity, but we're not following them to the next level. You know, they were laid out in the New Testament, but that was not an operating manual. It was I don't mean this in any demeaning way. It was a philosophical manual. But how do we take that philosophy and turn it into operations, day-to-day things that we can do to change the universe around us?
No, I was just thinking.
Sorry for the diatribe. I'm passionate about this.
When we, the biggest growth in our lives comes from when we have gone through crisis.
Yes.
And if you look back on any
Transformation.
crisis that you've had,
Yes.
you've spent more time perhaps praying or thinking about what you want for the outcome or whatever it will be. But you look back on that, and that's, for most people, it is said to be the biggest growth.
So how does that play out in Hosea? I just wanted to point out that I think some of these struggles are these, what we're discussing is deeply embedded in the story of Hosea. And remember, his wife is sort of been released. You know, she's now just running around kind of hopelessly from lover to lover, it says, from lover to lover. But finally, what does God instruct Hosea to do?
Take her back.
Get it
Take
back.
her back. That's redemption. So
Yeah.
God, in all his anger, now he so much loved her that he redeemed her.
This is a
That's redemption.
Yeah, this is almost a prototype, or not a prototype, but a analogy of our being sinful, and then God, you know, through Christ takes us back.
But I think it's important to say that at a depth level that God's got to change our heart. It's like that adulterous woman, and we all know this feeling that all of a sudden you're in love and then you're not in love, and the adulteress was not in love with him.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the question of transformation. How do you change her heart, right? To see again that you were the one, Hosea, providing her oil and her clothing and her money, right? It's, and so he has every right to say,
I remember saying that.
Yeah.
You're out of
Trying to get out of here, right?
but that, God says that's not where God's heart is. But God's move in Hosea is just, okay, you go and you claim her again, you redeem her again. That gives her dignity, remember? Gives her dignity. He could have just, you think of the one at the well, others, you know, who didn't have that dignity after 5 marriages. Here, she's going to be given dignity by Hosea, and he's doing that. So there's an analogy here to the cross. Something's got to change our heart.
The analogy.
It's got to go deep. So what is it? Last week, we have hearts of flesh, real hearts, or here I guess you'd say hearts who have knowledge of God, intimacy with God. So these are all going to be images that are going to be used in the New Testament, right? So obviously we don't read Hosea very much, but in Jesus' time they did. This was their scriptures. They knew Hosea. They knew this love language, the intimacy. Okay, the heart's got to change. We got to get, you know, like Robert says, you got to get moved beyond, right? There's got to be something transformative, and sacrificial system, as good as it was not transformative. It couldn't change the heart.
Absolutely.
And the question isn't why.
Absolutely.
What was missing in all this that didn't allow those transformations to occur? That would be a revolution. This is the American Revolution, a transformation in the concept of how humans interact with each other. So if we don't deal with the issue of transformation, then you never get the shift to occur. And and this is me speaking, and you know my points of view on this one, there's a design architecture. There's a design architecture. I categorize cultures in 3.
I want to stop you there to say that's what the Levitical system was, Russell. It was a design structure
that didn't work.
that ultimately did not work. That's correct, but didn't work after like 1,000 years. Okay, so I'd like to view it in those terms. I don't want to go too much into the weeds here on that. I do want to say the Levitical system was a system set up with architecture and design to change Israel. And then as we read here, it didn't.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. We needed
But
something.
but we know even to that Levitical imagery was still the hidden meaning, the hiddenness of God's grace unfolding,
Solutions.
right? So I was just gonna say too, this, we're kind of saying the same thing. One way I continue to think about it is two rails. You've got to hold these two rails. The one rail is the narrative that God is saying, follow my law. You follow my law, you're good. I mean, he does not say, he is very clear, iniquity, sin is not God's righteousness. And there's a price to be paid for that. There's a price to be paid. Yeah, but even on that top rail, he's still saying, by the way, I want you to try to be good. Here's how you can be good. The 10 Commandments, so to speak. Now, underneath all of that is this second rail that says, by the way, you'll never be good enough.
Right.
And it's really important because it's setting up all the way back to Genesis, and it's setting up Christ, and it's setting Hosea, who says, in the end, the story is Hosea is God. God graciously loving the people who have hurt him, right? And that takes us all the way to Christ. Right? So these two rails, and that's where it gets hard to tell people that, you know, you can't just sit on rail one, because then you're into good works. Just try hard to be.
And we know that doesn't work. That's not the architecture
No.
that's gonna get us.
It doesn't ultimately work. There's good in there, because it reveals our sin, but it also helps us, right? But it doesn't get you there. And you can't just be there, but you need the top rail that enlightens you about the bottom rail, right? You can't just throw away the top, because that's the story.
I'd like to build on that one a little bit,
The grace of God.
but shift the paradigm a little bit. So I'm going to use a different paradigm, but illustrating essentially what you're saying, is that in my study of human behavior over the last 3,000 years, and one of the reasons why I love reading this is because it tells us a lot about human behavior, that everybody in this room actually has a genetic code to be adversarial, transactional, or collaborative. Okay, well, I know how to be adversarial. I was a warrior. I fought in a war. I know how to kill people. Not that I like it, but I have that built in. All of you do. You've all been fighters at some time in your life. We also have the ability to be transactional. That's how basically our society works today. All of our economics. Let's make a deal. Okay, in marriages. Okay, I'll make a deal with you. If you do this, I'll do that, etc. And I can go on and
If
on.
I bring
don't
home
wanna
the
go on and
flowers,
on.
will you forgive me?
But we also have the ability to be collaborative. It's built into us. It's in our genetic code. God put it there to do all three. But what Christ did was say, all right, I don't want to be transactional. A transaction is like as a law. You obey the law and you get this back in return. That's a deal. I don't want you to be adversarial. What I want you to do is be collaborative, and that's what love thy neighbor really means. The problem is, in my opinion, that society has figured out all the rules of engagement around being adversarial, how to beat the living crap out of people, excuse my language, how to be transactional, how to make deals all over the place. But our architecture for collaboration, for love, for trust is highly deficient. That's been my personal life's goal, is actually to lay out what that architecture is. And I encourage all of you to join me in figuring out the design architecture that God had for collaboration. How do we love thy neighbor better?
Okay, it's again a good way, and I'll try to close this.
Is that a different paradigm? But in the
It's,
same
no, I think
basic
it's the paradigm we have in Hosea. We're gonna find it over and over again with the prophets. There's a certain skepticism, Robert, about any architecture being strong enough. It's not about architecture, because Hosea, they tried, Leviticus, they tried. We're gonna go through all the prophets. it keeps failing because something about human weakness doesn't allow any good architecture, even the law. Jesus says, the law is perfect. I'm not come to change the law. But the New Testament, then, I think people are getting cynical by the time of the New Testament because they're reading all these prophets. It all doesn't work. And then we have to say, do we need a champion? Do we need a champion here? Someone who can break through and do discover a new paradigm shift. And so we, in the New Testament, that's why Jesus goes out into the wilderness to be tempted. He's playing the role of Israel here. And what would Israel always do when it was tempted?
Oh, go for it.
Hosea, he go with Baal.
Big fail.
Hey, you don't get rid of Yahweh. You do both at the same time. You lead an adulterous life. That's so much easier than having to give up your first wife. You just add on. I'm not speaking from personal experience. But that's what Hosea is saying. You can't do that. That's no. And so the New Testament is trying to say Jesus was faithful, right? He did not give in to temptation. All these stories, especially Matthew, because that's what we're going through right now, are trying to go back and say, oh, we need a champion because we know architecture is working. We need a champion for the breakthrough. And then the New Testament picks up on how Jesus is the champion. What does his death mean? How does that break through and start creating in us the opportunities now through faith? Through faith, it's like a big deal here to actually follow some of the architecture, which was positive, collaborative, those types of
By
things.
the way, business. we
Think
call those
about New
champions
Testament.
of collaboration.
Well, we're going to get all that New Testament, but I'd say the collaboration, you're probably going to get more in Paul, who says, okay, now what do you do with this Christ crucified? Oh, look what it can do. It can create, then he's going to use body language. He's going to use marriage language, right? I talk about the mystery of marriage. Oh, by the way, I'm talking about the mystery of the faith, that you're going to know God in an intimate way. So the reason I'm pointing this out is I think all these dynamics that we're discussing sets us up for the New Testament. Right? Sets us up really well for the New Testament. In fact, otherwise, why is Jesus going out in the wilderness? Why is he doing those things? Doesn't make sense. Why did he have to be baptized? All these stories are in response to what we're reading in Hosea and the other prophets. So, okay. Last comment.
Last week when we were talking about the prodigal son, and I was saying that I felt sorry for the other son who stayed. So when I went home, I started laughing because I saw myself and I said, wait a minute, you're the prodigal. Aren't you a prodigal a lot of times? Thank God, God is more merciful to me than I was to that older son.
Yeah.
I'm serious because it hit me. I said, wait a minute, you're sitting in judgment.
You don't have the
And God, thank you, God, you're not judging me like that. So that was a good lesson.
Good. On that high note.
That is a high note.
Are you going to tell him what he's doing?
No, we're going to all go and attack him after this session's over. I'm going to say a prayer that everybody's going to go to the gym and talk to him and give him a piece of your what?
About the prayer meeting?
We'll all talk to him.
All right, so can we talk about it after the prayer for a minute so you guys can fill me in?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's close with a word of prayer. And good and gracious God, indeed, you reach out to redeem us. As hard as this story of Hosea is, we see ourselves in it.
Yes.
And so we thank you, despite our unfaithfulness, that you love us, you reach out, you redeem. And where we were once unloved, you have now called us the children of God. And for that, we give you thanks. Bless us. And in these days, this afternoon, we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you for joining us online. We'll be turning it off. Now, we didn't go into small groups because it was just happening here.
It was.
While Jim is still here, any idea? So we set this up, Jim. We said that we could do this on Thursdays. That was our original idea. Jim said he'd like to lead this. I think, but the bigger issue is we feel we need a time of communal prayer. And maybe you can share just a couple of your ideas. Norma shared her group that she's participated in the past. I know others have as well. But just share your ideas briefly. And this is not something for just this week. We're going to be talking about this so that we can get some ideas on how to move forward.
I think that's a great place to start. I